It's a follow-up to the beloved game series with cult following, and it's been remade a couple times quite successfully. With the latest games in the series, it has become an even bigger and better name in the first-person shooter style of games, comparable with latest editions of Doom. So, when the developers of the better games have announced they'll make a collaborative project with another great developer famous for its immersive sim games, I was more than excited, expecting to have a highly dynamic shooter with immersive sim elements. In other words, I imagined to have a more brutal and responsive version of Dishonored, but with tried and true gunplay. Instead, we've got this. And while some may see this project as quite an obvious flop, I'd like to dig deeper and figure out what exactly happened with it. This is Wolfenstein Youngblood, and we are here to discuss why it failed. While Wolfenstein series starts its history in the 1980s, the most relevant period for us is the one when the series shifted ownership to ZeniMax Media and started developing games in Machine Games Studio. In 2014, we were blessed with the modern reboot of the series with Wolfenstein: The New Order, telling the most coherent and visually appealing story of the game's protagonist, PJ Blazkowicz. And if you've never played The New Order and The New Colossus, I specifically suggest you doing so, as the gameplay includes double-wielding rifles and shotguns in slaying Nazi armies and their attack, while the story of both games balances between a dramatic B-movie and an absurdly black comedy. In other words, both games are unique in their respects and are great fun to play despite their quite short campaigns. Both games were critical and commercial success, providing more than enough creative freedom, players' trust, and financial resources to make more projects under the Wolfenstein title. And to be honest, I expected to have a completely new story with completely new characters and completely new gameplay mode, due to both games drawing more than a clear conceptual and gameplay conclusions, if I'm not to spoil anything. And here we are in 2018, when a new title, Wolfenstein Youngblood, is being announced. The trailer shows that we get to play one of the Blazkowicz daughters to keep on the father's work destroying Nazis. With the trailer, there were rumors that the game has become co-op due to the overall aim to capitalize on the growing interest in multiplayer titles. Alongside the future game, there were Fallout 76, Elder Scrolls Blades for mobile, multiplayer modes for Prey and Doom Eternal, and the whole expectation regarding Youngblood was already suspicious. The rumors were somewhat confirmed by Bethesda SVP of Global Marketing, Pete Hines, telling that they were discussing this with the devs, and the conversation went like this. Devs told, "We want to do this thing where you get to play as one of BJ's twin daughters. What's the other one doing? Nothing. Or maybe they can be an AI companion. Well, if she's an AI companion, could you let somebody else play the other one?" And if this kind of conversations that really occur in modern gaming companies, I don't want to live on this planet anymore. He continued that it's co-op, but it's kind of the same game, because if somebody's not playing with you, it doesn't feel dramatically different. She's still there, whether it's an AI or a person. It doesn't change the experience wholesale. It's not like it's Skyrim and all of a sudden some dude turns up. Ultimately, as with all things, we are interested in what our devs think. Looking ahead, let me assure you that it were all either direct lies or the words of a person who doesn't see differences between two previous games and the current one, because they are different in an array of aspects, and the exact difference between a real player co-playing with you and AI makes a dramatic change in gameplay. And before we continue with discussing the actual game, here is another analogy for you. Mixing the efforts from Machine Games and Arcane is like meshing the devs of GTA and Need for Speed to make a new project, but instead of collecting data from both worlds, they deliver the story of the latest NFS games with the driving physics of San Andreas. Wolfenstein Youngblood is an unfortunate result of the same experiment. We'll start on a somewhat positive note with my admiration of the game's graphics and how it can work on a plethora of different gaming platforms, including Nintendo Switch. I like the designs of both main characters, the teenage daughters of BJ, Jessie and Sophia, who both resemble their parents while not looking overly out of place. I like how the game designs its visual appeal to have the combination of the 1980s technopunk identity with a lot of Nazi symbolism. It shows the streets and buildings of Paris in the most beautiful and immersive way by prioritizing the little details and demonstrating how live and bustling the city was just a minute before it was evacuated by the Nazis to repel the French resistance. And I like how greatly the game still manages to demonstrate the Nazi fashion in the most appealing and original way possible, full of contrasting black and red colors, full of sharp edges, and full of the original swag the historical records show. The designs of the robotic enemies are also great. They're not dumb and meaningless tin cans and boring metallic titans that are just big. Here, they're actually looking strong and menacing, making them formidable enemies even if you see them on the horizon. So if the gameplay was a lot better than it is currently, the local version of Paris is a joy to observe and progress. I'd be more willing to play just run and gun shooting sessions across its streets, rooms, even sewers and dungeons, just to see how well they look. And believe it or not, this makes the collecting a lot of upgrade and trivia items a lot more fun than it actually is objectively. As usual, we gotta warn you about the spoilers if you are somehow interested in experiencing the plot of Youngblood by yourself. But similar to many games we have in this series, you won't miss a great and intriguing story if I'll tell you it in several sentences. So the gameplay opens to the scenes of training both the characters during the teenage years by the older versions of BJ and his wife Anya. They are being trained to be strong, smart and powerful soldiers to stand a chance against Nazi attacks. Suddenly, BJ disappears and both girls decide to do something about it by leaving for Paris because they discovered that the father was recently spotted there. They contact the local point of French resistance with its leader Juju, telling that she's seen BJ trying to reach the mysterious Lab X that is full of secret Nazi technology, and for the girls to find the lab, they need to visit 3 major security towers to triangulate the location. We do just that, and eventually it turns out that Juju is a traitor. We find BJ, who tells us about the Hitler's plan to destroy the whole planet Earth with his death. We eventually defeat the traitors and reveal their plans to the real members of French resistance to have an open ending that somehow the story is going to be continued sometime in the future. I'm not even going to question all these story turns and stops because my cringe meter overloaded after the first Paris cutscene. I'll just tell you that the story of Youngblood does not add much to the previous stories and doesn't make any difference if the next game tries to continue BJ's adventures. It just exists as a decoration and conceptual framework to justify the whole existence of character sisters. But honestly, it's not that big of a deal. I cannot really complain about the main characters as they're depicted as casual teenagers who were given power suits and shotguns to grind through Nazis. As a result, they balance between being cute and cringe in their actions and reactions just like the real teenagers would. Still, it's a drastic change from the big, buff, yet overly depressed BJ who we got to know during the previous games. Final positive point of the gameplay mechanic is the shooting. The core mechanic of gunplay has remained almost unchanged, and that's a good thing. The feedback, the response, and the shooting mechanics are still as solid as they could have been. Too bad that the shooting is spoiled by progression, unlocks, and the grindfest progression, requiring you to always shoot health pools instead of the actual Nazi models like it happened previously. But the saddest thing, the graphical, conceptual, and shooting cores were more than solid, yet were not enough to compensate for the further gameplay mechanics. The story of Youngblood requires us to access and hack 3 main towers first, but we cannot, because the missions have level requirements on them. So, before we reach the required levels, we are to do an array of chores and mini missions for local resistance. These chores mostly include appearing on a certain segment of Paris, accessing a checkpoint, collecting some item, defeating some enemy, and returning back. We get upgrade items and experience as a reward to progress further and can repeat the gameplay to have access to further story missions. And even according to the modern standards, it's definitely not the worst approach to gameplay unless the missions are fun to do. Sadly, here the chores are repetitive quests to appear on the same levels, to do slightly different stuff, and different means interacting with different objects or defeating a different enemy. What is even worse, you can get respawnable enemies any moment without you noticing, and more frequently they appear over-leveled, meaning you cannot even damage them properly while they wipe the floor with you. The reasoning behind this is that the game is meant to be played either solo with AI or with another person online. The reality of this is that the AI is too dumb to follow you and assist you in any useful way, while the online players are so over-leveled that it becomes just uninteresting to be here, just being carried by some random guy. Every level we get a direct 2% bonus to damage we deal, so it's a huge difference that makes a combat encounter even worth engaging with. And even if we enter the encounter with equal levels, we still face the live service model of Grindfest, requiring us to shoot freaking health bars. But not with the weapons you like, no. The game directly tells that certain enemies are weaker to certain type of weapon, so in order to defeat it, you need to empty 1 mag of weapon 1 to weaken enemy's armor, and empty another 2 mags of weapon 2 to make their health bars go to 0, and it's just for one enemy. So the progression here is you collecting experience and upgrade items, you unlock perks to make you somewhat better and closer in power to BJ, and customize weapons to have their strongest versions they could have been. We all know that such approach only works in looter shooters and grindfests like Helldivers, where the combat is actually fun and the rewards are actually meaningful and always keep you grinding for more. Here, we grind only to unlock the subpar story segment and to grind further. Eventually, it stops being fun and makes you want to play another shooter, but once again, the saddest thing is not about its aforementioned flaws, it's about a lot of unrealized potential that could actually make the game kinda great on a niche level. Similar to the Immortals review, let's fantasize a bit about how would we change Youngblood to make it more pleasant to play. I would do the following. First and foremost, make different modes between story campaign and the online content missions. Make the 4 to 5 hours of story quests with linear and corridor-like levels where you'll be given the instructions on how to play one of the sisters and how to upgrade their weapons along with abilities. Tell the whole story about their father and the whole upcoming Nazi apocalypse and create the feeling of a highly dynamic and somewhat absurd B-movie we expected from the sequel in the first place. And afterwards, make a separate mode where we would grind the levels of parries in both PvE and PvP modes, similar to the mechanics they have in looter shooters. We would approach both modes either solo or in co-op, create more cosmetics and character models to slay the hordes of Nazis further. Second, remove the freaking bullet sponge from the enemies and make them similar to the ones they have in looter shooters or ARPGs like Diablo. Separate them by common, rare and epic, and shorten the overall time to kill the enemies so that we would progress the levels and missions faster to start again with some rewards. The graphics and shooting core would allow for perfect gunplay that is fast, dynamic, and when in co-op it would make it even more engaging. Third, make more seasonal content like they have in looter shooters. We all know how people love grinding for the new weapon skin, so make it possible for them. Just don't mix the story mode with live service in one project. By the way, let me know what you'd change in Youngblood to make it more how you want it in the comments. In total, Wolfenstein Youngblood is not only the case of mistreated potential, but also abandoned to an extent that it makes me even depressed. We could have really had a solid version of arcade shooter, like the one we did in Unreal Tournament. We could have had a live service with grind and cosmetics, and we could have had some decent story mode. Instead, we get great graphics, mid-story, and great shooting, completely drowning in the unbalanced and bullet sponge fest. And I only wish that at least some level of care would be given to Youngblood, like Bethesda gives to Fallout 76. It would potentially become a lot better. Should you try it right now? Kinda doubtful, because previous Wolfenstein games are better in all aspects, while live service games like Helldivers, Space Marine 2, Destiny 2 and many others have a lot more to offer. But here is hoping that the next game would be the result of lessons learned from Youngblood, because I totally don't want to play this style of game once again.